Well, welcome to Bangor on Deer Racecourse, just before Christmas. And it's good to be joined by BHA Chief Executive Nick Rust, who's going to talk about several topics today, Nick, but there's only one place to start before we put everything in the mixer, and that is the case of Jim Best, long-running saga, best part of a year, ended last week with a 6-month ban. We'll talk about that later, but it's a broad question to start with. How can people at home, how can racing fans, how can punters have any faith in the way racing integrity is policed after a fiasco like that?
Well, I think there's two things to focus on. As the sports governing body, the BHA has primary responsibility, obviously, for regulation and integrity matters. There are two things that I need to see happen and make sure happen. One of those is to make sure that we have a quasi-judicial system, our disciplinary panels, our appeal board, and the licensing board, which is fit for purpose and is seen as fair by participants. And the second thing is to make sure that we root out all potential integrity matters when they occur. On the first one, Christopher Quinlan QC, I involved from July this year and asked to undertake a full review of our quasi-judicial panel. We committed to publishing that up front before we knew what he was going to say. And he conducted his review and said that he found that our existing system was fair and legally robust. That wasn't what we asked him to do. We asked him to say, how can you make it more for to be at the top of sports regulation, and he's come in with some regulations which we are implementing now.
Let's go back to the genesis of this problem. Why did the BHA first charge Jim Best with stopping 2 horses, along with Paul John, when no action was taken on the day?
Well, the offences were identified. One of the rides was identified and referred, and Paul John was being charged. But during that process, he came forward and, through his legal representatives, made some allegations, which are pretty serious, given that he's a young, vulnerable, conditional jockey. In what the panel eventually said were reprehensible actions from Mr.
Sorry,
Best.
Nick, there have been suggestions that these charges were laid against Jim Best before you had even interviewed Paul John. Is that correct?
No, the situation was that his legal representatives came forward and gave evidence and sought, or rather suggested that he had some evidence, and sought some guidance about what he might be able to expect if he came forward and put his allegations on the record. So that happened before we took things forward. That's the point that's being raised with us and being suggested in the media over the last few days.
First hearing ended, BHA hearing ended with a 4-year ban for Jim Best. Tell me about your reaction to that at the time.
Well, obviously, we'd seen and looked at the case and prepared the case, and we had some considerable concerns, which is why we pushed the case forward to happen. And in the circumstances where a young jockey has been compromised effectively, and horses have been stopped, and punters have been, misled, shall we say, we thought that the ban was appropriate at the time. 1
month later, it emerged that the chairman of that panel, a solicitor called Matthew Lone, he had perception of bias. He'd been paid, he'd been on the BHA payroll. Your reaction when you heard that, you must have been sick to hear that.
Well, look, it was something that had been considered previously, but we'd made an error of judgment. We decided that because what he had done was to assist us on a matter that the team at the time had felt was a discrete matter away from his disciplinary panel duties. This was about a medical matter at Cheltenham, about the referral of some doctors to the General Medical Council. And internally at the BHA, as I understand it, we needed some help from someone who understood the medical system, and Matthew Lone happens to be a qualified doctor as well. So he was approached to assist, and then eventually there was a board inquiry into the matters with regard to Cheltenham, and he was engaged on that. The matter was considered, and we felt it was discreet at the time, and that was an error of judgment.
His role is key. We have to explore it. Original ban quashed, public apology, highly embarrassing for your body, but the entire case turns on Matthew Lone's input. I want to explore that. You promised to be open and transparent when this inquiry is over. Answer me these questions. First, why in the world did such an experienced lawyer not declare his vested interest before the first hearing?
I don't know, you'll have to ask him. It was his judgment, I suppose, was that he saw it as a discrete matter, but you'd have to ask him.
More importantly, and this does go to your role in the proceedings, why did the BHA, why on earth did they choose to ignore a submission from the PJA in December 14 suggesting that Mr. Lone's presence on those panels was, quote, entirely improper?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was in February 2015 when we received the letter. We did not ignore it. It was considered at our disciplinary review group. The main part of the letter was the concern from the Jockeys Association with regard to stewards appearing on the disciplinary panel because of conflict with race day activities. That was their main concern. They did mention lower down Matthew Loan issue and a few other issues. We responded formally with our view at the time that it was not something that needed to be disclosed unless he was going to consider a medical matter. So as far as we were concerned, I arranged to meet Paul Struthers after that and gave him a commitment that at the end of the integrity review that we were in the middle of, we would publish and get involved with a full disciplinary review and take on board.
So one name, whose advice did you rely on to continue using his services?
To continue using Matthew Loan.
Yeah.
At the time when he was engaged, a number of people were involved in that. You will see that in the full timeline that we published this afternoon. Everything is going to be there from when he was engaged in 2013, what he was paid, when decisions were taken, when we considered matters, when we responded to the PJA. We've got nothing to hide, but we did make a mistake.
Have you spoken to Matthew Loan recently, and does he intend to explain his actions because he's kept an incredibly low profile?
Well, as you will be aware, he hasn't been renewed on our disciplinary panel. His arrangement came to an end in November, and he hasn't been used since the appeal was successful from Jim Best. I haven't spoken to him. I have no cause to speak to him. He's a member of the disciplinary panel, which is at arm's length from the BHA executive.
BHA have any plans to take legal action against him?
No. Finally,
in this section, we're going to move on to other matters involving Jim Best, etc. How would the conversation go if you bumped into Matthew Loan at the racecourse here today?
I don't think I'd have a conversation with him because I think it might compromise each party. I will keep at arm's length from Matthew Loan. I think it's best that we move on from the issue.
So much more to discuss about this Jim Best saga, the independent hearing, the fallout from the 6-month ban, and plenty other matters, ABP, any other business later on. But for now, we'll just check out with Nick Rust. We'll be back soon after the next race for more on this Jim Best verdict.